In what's being described the most difficult budget in the city's history, Auckland councillors have just agreed to a 3.5% rates hike and the sale of millions of dollars in assets. And that's for a starter. The city coffers have been hit hard due to COVID-19 and the region's ongoing drought. At a press conference a few minutes ago, the Mayor of Auckland, Phil Goff, says the only way they could have plugged a $750 million hole would have been a 28% rates hike. And Phil Goff joins me now live. Phil, this is a bit of it's a no-win situation, isn't it? Do you feel bad about having to bump rates up?
Well, it's tough. The rate rise is the same rise that was set out in our long-term plan and that I campaigned on in the last election. But with COVID-19, if we could have managed it, a lower rate rise would have been great. But we went, and when I say we, the whole of council and all of our local boards right across Auckland, we went through all the facts. It was an evidence-driven approach, and the damage that we would have done to key services to Aucklanders and really slashing back our investment in infrastructure projects, which would have been counterproductive in terms of economic recovery, was just going to be too great. The difference was between 2.5% and 3.5% rates rise. Now, if you've got $1 million home, that difference adds up, I think, to 47 cents a week extra with the 3.5% increase rather than the 2.5%. But that 47
but on
cents
average,
a week on individual properties means a lot in terms of projects that we would have had to have cancelled, building construction work we couldn't have done.
On average, what's the yearly value per household?
Of a total...
of the total increase?
Total 3.5% increase. I think it's within the vicinity of $120, $130 a year, so that's just over a couple of bucks a week.
What makes you think people can afford it? Because they're struggling too. Some of them have lost their jobs. COVID is affecting them as well. How do you know that you're not just putting people under more pressure that they can't deliver on?
Look, some people are under huge pressure because of COVID-19. They've lost their jobs, they've lost their businesses, their income has gone down. But the people that are facing that genuine hardship, we've catered for with a rates postponement scheme that we're putting about $50 million into in this financial year, which will allow people that have fallen on hard times because of COVID-19 to postpone their rates until such time as they're in a position to pay it. So what we've focused our resources on... But
that just delays the pain, though, doesn't it?
Well, no. If I've lost my job and, it's 6 months before I can get back on my feet, I'm going to really welcome the fact that I don't have to pay any of my rates now and I can pay it later on. We're not in the business of selling people's property from under them because they can't pay their rates for very genuine reasons. We'll bend over backwards to help people in that situation.
Do you know how many people have asked for some kind of relief due to COVID?
We started off with putting aside more money because we thought we'd need it. But the impact so far has been slightly less than what we estimated, and that's partly because we've gone back into level one more quickly than we thought. So the losses that the council face are less than what they would have been. We were looking at a $525 million loss. We've been able to pull that back to about $425 million. That was the good news. The bad news was with the 1 in 200 year drought and the need to urgently bring forward construction of new infrastructure, that's going to add another $224 million capital costs to building new water treatment plants at Tuakau and at Papakura.
So as well as the rates rise, water charges are going to go up too?
Yeah, that's up to Watercare, but I have no doubt that if we're going to have to spend that extra money, there's only, the only people that can pay for the cost of providing that water infrastructure are those people that use the water.
Any idea how much that's going to be? Because that's another thing on top of the rates rise, isn't it?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, on the flip side of that, I think probably Auckland has both the best quality water and the cheapest water in the country. And on the good side of it, from a consumer point of view, we consume less water per household than any other region in New Zealand except the Bay of Plenty. So, look, I have no doubt that whenever you put the price of anything up, there is resistance to that, and sometimes it can cause pressure. For you and me, we won't even notice it. But there are people for whom it will cause pressure. And I think the way to tackle that problem because you can never set your rates, for example, on the lowest common denominator of the poorest person in the community. The answer is that you've got to lift the income of those people through social transfers, through central government. That's the way to do it.
Okay, because some listeners have got in touch with us saying they've already noticed significant increases in their water bills. Are you hearing about that?
Well, they haven't yet because, they may have on the 1st of July. I think Watercare put their water rates up by about 2.5%. That wouldn't have been something that people would feel hugely heavily, but they're going to have to look at their water rates again. There's no doubt about that. But, unfortunately, if you need the capital to build that infrastructure to provide the water, we've got to pay for it. Watercare's got to pay for it. So,
what else? What else are you going to have to hock off?
The stuff we're selling, people have called it asset sales. For me, surplus property that you're not using and you don't have an intended use for in the future is not an asset, it's a liability because it costs you money to keep and maintain, but most of all it's the opportunity cost. If you've got money invested in a vacant lot of land that you once needed for roading purposes and you hold on to it, that's money you couldn't have been, you don't have available to invest in a new infrastructure project to provide better transport or better environment protection or better housing.
Understand. How many are there of those, and are they all stuff that you would have used for roading? Or give us a bit of a cross-section. What are you talking about?
There's a public list of them, so you can look at all the properties. I think there's about 44 that we've cleared already for sale, and they're bits and pieces of property. One councillor gave an example over in Northcote, a landlocked piece of property that you could only get in if you landed by helicopter, surrounded by other houses. The local board opposed that, but we couldn't figure out why. Obviously that was just a piece of land that was never going to be used. There's lots of land that we buy through Auckland Transport, and then the roading plans change and it's not used. So that's the first sale of surplus property that you'd look at. But we're also going to have to look at things such as leasing out your concessions for your car parking buildings, such as Victoria Street Car Park. Instead of us running it ourselves, lease it out, get money up front.
Right, so maybe people can expect to pay more for their parking as well.
That really depends on who takes over and what the competition is. Probably the council car parking buildings are slightly cheaper than the ones, for example, that Wilson's run, but I'm not sure that there's a huge amount in it.
Okay. Your council didn't take the wage subsidy, did it?
No, we weren't eligible to do that.
Should you have? No, Team New Zealand did.
We couldn't have. We couldn't have because while our income dropped by $425 million this year, that didn't reach the threshold of a 30% drop in income. And, we would have taken it off the ratepayer and put it on the taxpayer, but most of us are both taxpayers and ratepayers if we had been eligible, which we weren't. And, to some extent, we as a city got to stand on our own feet where we can, and we'll do that. We don't want constantly to have our hand out, but we do recognise that most of the revenue in the country goes to central government, so we do expect there to be greater revenue sharing in future.
On that point, you can only raise rates so many times and so much, and when there is a serious infrastructure burden, potentially, you've got to look to other revenue sources. We're almost out of time, but give me the number one option that you would like to see from central government to help you out here.
Well, there's a thing called a special purpose vehicle where you can take debt off the books of council. We could do that, for example, for Watercare, which would give us more flexibility in terms of borrowing for new infrastructure. So that would help. I've also talked to the government, of course. They put GST on our rates. Maybe they could return that GST on rates to us, and that's probably worth about $300 million extra a year to us. That rightly belongs to the people of our city, and it'd be great if they'd contemplate that, but neither political party have put that up as a promise, unfortunately.
Appreciate your time this evening. That is the Auckland Mayor, Phil Goff.